I am so delighted to get the opportunity to talk about trees and how important trees are to me. As a little girl, my father taught me a great love of trees. When I was 9 years old, we moved to an acreage just about a half hour's drive outside of the city of Edmonton. And we moved to that acreage because it was just a piece of farmland that had been designated and sold off for the farmers that was planted with the most amazing variety of trees. And they were laid out in such a way that it was a beautiful, beautiful yard. We had, I think, 3 or 4 acres of land. And there was everything from spruce trees to pine trees to poplar and birch and um, a few flowering ornamental trees. And before I was even a teenager, my father had taught me how to prune trees. He had such a love for trees that he would take me out into the yard, and it was special father-daughter time. Dad and I would walk around and survey the trees and see what needed to be cleaned out under them and see who needed pruning to help them grow. We would watch for bugs and decide whether or not we needed to treat it with anything. He took such pride in our beautiful, beautiful yard. And even though I had a younger brother, he really didn't have any interest. So I got all of that daddy time for me. And it developed such a strong, strong love and appreciation for these beautiful, as our Indigenous people say, tree people. For my father did teach me that they are living beings that we have to respect and take care of. And I went through my whole life loving and respecting trees. Anytime I came across a tree with a broken branch, I felt compelled to go over and just touch that tree and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope that feels better," and just try to give it some loving attention. And the whole love of tree thing led me into my favorite times being times that we went camping in forested areas so that I could wander off in the trees. I could hug trees. I could sit with my back against a tree. And I remember one time we were in a campground and there were some really, really huge spruce trees. And because it was in a campground, they'd pruned off all of the bottom branches. So there was enough space under the bottom branch for me to stand. And I just couldn't help myself. I walked over and I gave this tree a big hug, and I was just standing there holding this tree. And I overheard a mom walking with her young one as they went by, and the little guy said, "Mom, what's wrong with that lady? She's standing there holding that tree." And she said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with her, dear. She's just hugging that tree. It feels good to hug a tree. Would you like to hug a tree too and see for yourself?" And I was just warmed that there was that influence. And that takes me to another story, another time where I was in Fish Creek Park in Calgary. Again, another park filled with such a variety of trees, although I guess predominantly poplar, spruce trees, that sort of thing. At any rate, I was just going for one of my nature walks, forest bathing, enjoying being in the forest, using all of my senses. And then I could hear this really strong whack, whack. And it was very distinct. I could tell that it was the sound of a stick hitting a tree trunk. And my stomach kind of went into knots. And I thought, oh dear, that poor tree. So I went for a walk and I got closer and closer to the sound that was quite persistent, quite loud. And I came across 3 young lads who were probably 8, 9 years old. And sure enough, being boys, they had their sticks, they were playing, but one of them was just wailing on this tree trunk. And so I approached, I left quite a bit of space between myself and the boys. And I thought, okay, approach this from a place of love. breathe deeply, because I was shaking at this injustice against the tree. And it would have been easy to go, what are you boys doing? What do you think you're doing? And I just knew that that wasn't going to go anywhere. So I stopped and I took a few deep breaths and I gathered the energy of the forest around me. And I said, hey guys, how's it going? And they kind of stopped and looked at me like, what do you want, lady? And I said, I couldn't help but hear the sound of that stick hitting the tree trunk. And it sounded like you were hitting that tree pretty hard. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but a tree is a living thing, just like you and I are. And I know if your buddy was to turn around and hit you with that stick, it would really hurt. So maybe you want to just consider that maybe that tree trunk feels that too, and it hurts. And they all stopped and they just looked at me. And I thought, well, this is the deciding moment. Just hold that space, hold it, hold it. And the boy standing beside the boy that was hitting the tree trunk went, that makes a lot of sense. And he looked at his friend and they looked at each other and they went off to play, but not with the tree trunk per se. And it was quiet. And I just felt, thank you that message landed. And I'm sure that tree was saying, thank you. and that tree respect, the tree support carried through full circle. After my father passed, I went to find solace under a tree because trees just made me think about Dad. And there is a little green belt that's not far from our house, and it contains several large spruce trees, including even a blue spruce. But I was choosing this big poplar to sit on the ground with my back up against the tree. And as I was sitting there with my back against the tree, I decided that I would just be okay with feeling sad that my dad was now gone. And I was sitting there crying and just having some fond memories and feeling the appreciation that this tree was there behind me and reminding me of Dad. And I can't remember if I had my hands over my face or if I was just looking down and crying. And all of a sudden I could feel like there was somebody there. And I looked up and there was a person standing there on the sidewalk a ways away from me. And he looked at me really calmly and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, not really, but I will be. My dad just died and I'm just feeling sad and I'm just letting myself be sad with it." And the person said, "And your dad knows. He feels you and your love. You're going to be okay." And I said, "Thank you." And I kind of looked down and I wiped my eyes and I looked up and there was no one there. I swear to you, it was an angel sent just to comfort me in that moment and let me know that my dad was still with me. It was really quite amazing. And I cried some more, but it was more release. It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. It was joy. It was awe at this amazing experience. I mean, I looked that way and there was just no one to see. It was like the person had vanished into thin air, which is what made me feel like it was an angel that came to see me. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful moment that I will relish for the rest of my life.
Think about the stories you've just shared as a progression of like fibers that make up threads, that make up strings, that make up cords, that make up rope. What is the fibers to rope story that you would link those three stories through? What is it about the trees that has given meaning to you?
The fact that there is the the knowledge, it started with the base knowledge that trees are living beings, just like you and I. And learning to have respect for all life by learning to have respect for trees. That came through my father. And that respect for trees and that love for trees led me to those young boys and wanting to teach them in a loving, kind, and gentle way so that they really understood and embodied that sense of basic knowledge that trees are living things and deserve to be respected. And that just coming full circle back to thinking about my father and naturally being drawn to a tree for comfort because it was a good memory. Being with my dad in those days when I was young, where we were pruning the trees together and taking care of trees together, was a bonding thing for us. So there was a sense of connection. And there is also a sense of connection with the earth to sit beneath a tree, and a sense of connection to the tree itself, which then lends to a sense of connection with all life. If the tree and I can feel like one, then it's easier to feel like I'm life with everything. And I found myself turning to trees many times when I needed that sense of comfort or support, really. There was another time where I had been assigned a quest. My husband and I have a program called The Quest, and you're given an assignment to fulfill. And that assignment is based on sort of some intuitive guidance that we receive about what might be a great path for you to take. At any rate, he had given me a turkey feather and said, it's up to you to determine what to do with this. And so I held on to that turkey feather and I made a lot of inquiries. I approached an Indigenous friend and said, my husband thought that I might make a smudging fan out of this turkey feather, but that doesn't feel quite right. And she said, oh, no, 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 absolutely not. You only use an eagle feather for smudging. A turkey feather is always present at gifting ceremonies. And I went, okay, all right. So the turkey feather represents gifting. And over time, there are amazing connections in how all of this came to be. But I ended up assembling a whole number of components to create a fan. And I had all of these components and I thought, well, but how do I put them all together? What do I do? Sometimes when I'm looking for answers, I either spend time near water or I spend time in the forest. And so I went to a park. And as I was standing with my back against a tree, and I think it was a really big poplar tree, the kind with lots of little knobby eyes that you can see in the bark, like they're looking at you and they see you. And so I leaned against that tree and I just asked that question. So what do I do with all of these components? How do I assemble all of these feathers and crystals and rocks that I've put together? And I closed my eyes and I was gifted with a vision of a feather fan wrapped in white leather. It had little beads all around forming a circle with a teardrop piece of turquoise stitched into that circle. And there were ribbons hanging from the bottom. And I was just like, oh, that's it. That's my vision. That feels so right. That's what I have to do. I turned around and I hugged the tree and said, thank you for just supporting me and holding the space for me to receive that vision. And it actually ended up taking a full year before everything came together. Apparently you can't rush the process of making a ceremonial fan. Everything needs to fall into place in the right way. And as I said, there are amazing synchronicities that I could go into in that story. But the bottom line of it is it was that tree that gave me that support and connection to the vision so that I could begin to take action and move forward in my life with that vision. And I have this beautiful ceremonial fan that if I had known I was going to talk about, I could have brought and shown you, but that just kind of popped out.
There you go. There you go. You chose your background for a reason.
Mm,
Where,
absolutely.
yeah. So I'd ask that you just share a little bit about why this background and what would you ask of me about that forest?
Mm. So I chose this background because it is a beautiful, beautiful forest. As you can see, there are lots of trees, lots of big spruce trees, and those trees are spaced out so that you can see through them. So they're dense enough that it feels like a forest, but they're spaced enough that they don't feel claustrophobic. It actually feels very inviting to me. And they're spaced enough that that light is streaming through. You can see those light beams streaming through. And it, to me, whenever I see sunbeams that stream through like that, it feels very divine. There, it brings me to such a reminder that that one power, that one source that created everything, me, you, Stephen, these trees, everything is created by this one divine love light power. And it feels like it's shining through and showing me this love in a visible format. So I love that. I love that there is the visual reminder that spirit, creator, source, the universe, God, whatever name you use, is always there with us. And then it has this friendly little path that you just invites you, it begs you to come and walk along. And so if you were with me, I would invite you to take off your shoes and to walk on that path in bare feet and feel the earth beneath your feet and receive all the beautiful benefits of having your bare skin connect with the bare earth. There are a whole big, big, long list of scientifically proven medical benefits for earthing, as we call it, putting bare skin on the bare earth. And I would also invite you to just smell the forest, all the different smells. There's ferns along the pathway. I'd invite you to touch them and just feel what they feel like and notice the difference between how ferns feel versus how the little pokey spruce needles feel. And to take it in not just visually, but to take it in through the feeling of touch and smell and listening. What do you hear when you're in the forest? Oh, you know, the sound of the wind rustling leaves, the birds chirping, that crack of a branch that you step on, or the crunching of leaves if it's fall, they're nice and crunchy on the ground. There's so much to experience. And the more you engage all of those senses in that experience, the more healing and calming and captivating and enchanting that experience is. And so this particular forest scene takes me back to many times when I have actually been in a forest like this and done that very thing of forest bathing, you know, immersing myself in the forest and feeling it with all of my senses. And I love to take children out into the forest and invite them to do the same. Um, this past summer, I was taking women out into the forest to do forest bathing. And it was fun because in some of those cases, it was like taking children because there were women who had never experienced a forest in that way. They had never taken their shoes off to walk in the forest. I said, look, there's some sphagnum moss. Go stand on the moss on your bare feet. And one of the women was like, oh, that is so exquisite. I didn't know it could feel like that. To think I've lived over 60 years and I've never experienced what that feels like. It was an amazing thing to share this and have these women experience this in this way. And and you cannot spend time in a forest in this way with all of your senses fully experiencing it and not walk out with a greater appreciation and respect for the trees, for the animals that live amongst the trees, for gratitude for the experience itself, for the sense of peace and calm that comes from being in that environment, the awareness of connection, the reminder of that source that is all around us and that connects us as one energy born of that same source.